The Janitor Who Saved the Heir's Life Without Knowing It Part 1. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. It was almost midnight at the Ward Corporation Tower in downtown Chicago. The building had long fallen silent except for the low hum of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic squeak of a mop gliding across marble floors. Ethan Cole, 38, worked the graveyard shift as a janitor. His hands were rough, his shoes worn, and his mind heavy with the thought of his daughter's next hospital bill. Yet tonight, something felt different. The air was tense, carrying the echo of a heated argument coming from the executive floor. He froze near the elevator as voices rose above the hum of machines. "Lucas, you have 72 hours to present a stable marital record, or the board will remove you from the CEO line," said a sharp male voice. Then another voice, colder, confident, answered, "So they would rather see my uncle take over? Over my dead body." Ethan hesitated but curiosity pulled him closer. When the elevator doors opened, a tall man in a dark suit stepped out. Lucas Ward, the heir to the billion-dollar Ward Corporation. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed from exhaustion. For a brief second, their eyes met. Ethan lowered his gaze immediately. "Sorry, sir," he murmured. "Did not mean to be in the way." Lucas did not respond at first, but his expression softened as recognition flickered. Remembered that face. The man who had pulled him from the wreckage months ago, when his car had burst into flames on the interstate. Lucas had never known the rescuer's name until now. He took a slow breath. "You are Ethan, right? The janitor who works the night shift?" Ethan nodded, uneasy. "Yes, sir. Just doing my job." Lucas studied him, then said quietly, "You saved my life." Ethan blinked, startled. "I was just passing by." "Anyone would have done the same." Lucas shook his head. "No. Not anyone." There was a pause, the kind that changes the air between two men. Then, unexpectedly, Lucas said, "Ethan, I need your help again. I need someone I can trust, someone with no ties to this world of greed and lies." Ethan frowned. "What kind of help?" Lucas's jaw tightened. "A contract marriage. 90 days. On paper only. It will save my position until the audit is done." Ethan laughed under his breath, thinking it was a joke, but Lucas's eyes did not waver. "I will pay you enough to cover your daughter's surgery. No strings, no intimacy, just a contract." The mop slipped from Ethan's hand, water spreading across the floor like spilled light. "You cannot be serious," he whispered. "I clean your floors, Mr. Ward." "I am not the kind of man who—" "You are exactly the kind of man I need," Lucas interrupted. "Because you have nothing to prove and nothing to hide." For a moment, the sound of the city outside faded, leaving only the heartbeat of fluorescent lights. Ethan looked at Lucas, the billionaire whose name was printed on every floor of the building, and felt a mix of disbelief and pity. "You want me to be your husband," he said slowly, "to save your inheritance." Lucas gave a small nod. "To save what is left of my name. And maybe to pay back a debt." The silence stretched. Somewhere below, the janitor's radio buzzed faintly. Ethan exhaled, rubbing a hand over his tired face. "I do not belong in your world, Mr. Ward." Lucas's voice softened. "Neither do I, Ethan. Not anymore." The rain began to fall against the glass, soft but relentless, like time itself. Ethan glanced at the reflection of the two men standing side by side, one in a $1,000 suit, the other in a stained janitor's uniform, and felt the strange pull of destiny. "All right," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "Let us talk about this contract." The faintest hint of relief crossed Lucas's face. He extended his hand, and when Ethan shook it, their worlds quietly collided. Two men bound by fate, a secret, and a deal that would soon turn their lives upside down. The janitor who saved the heir's life without knowing it, Part 2. The next morning, Ethan stood outside the ward tower again, the city still wrapped in early fog. The night before had felt like a dream, or a cruel joke, but the crisp envelope in his pocket said otherwise. Inside it was a draft of the marriage contract, embossed with the Ward Corporation seal. He had barely slept, replaying every word Lucas had said. 90 days. No intimacy. Discretion absolute. Payment upon completion. It sounded ridiculous, but the amount written at the bottom made his heart stop. It was enough to cover his daughter's entire surgery and a year of treatment. Enough to give her a chance to run again. When he arrived at his modest apartment, his mother was waiting by the window, folding laundry with slow, practiced hands. "You came home late," she said softly. "Work again?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Something like that." He sat at the small kitchen table and looked at a faded photograph of his daughter taped to the fridge. Her name was Noah. She had her mother's smile and the same heart condition that had taken her mother too soon. He could still remember the doctor's words echoing in the sterile hospital room, "Without surgery, it will only get worse." Ethan clenched his jaw. He had promised his little girl that he would find a way. Now, maybe, that way had found him. Later that afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up in front of his building. A driver stepped out, handed him a card, and said, "Mr. Ward is expecting you." Ethan's stomach tightened. 20 minutes later, he was seated in Lucas Ward's penthouse office on the 71st floor. The room was a world away from the janitor's break room. He knew the air smelled of leather and cedar, the skyline glittering through the glass. Lucas stood by the window, his posture composed but his expression unreadable. "You came," he said simply. Ethan gave a stiff nod. Still not sure why. Lucas turned, sliding a folder across the table. "Because you are a father. I read your file. You have a daughter with a heart condition. The surgery costs $200,000. I can cover that and more. All you have to do is sign and stand beside me at a few events. We will tell the world we are married. Nothing more." Ethan stared at the folder, then at Lucas. "Why me? You could hire an actor, a model, anyone." Lucas's mouth curved into a humorless smile. "Because anyone else would sell the story. You would protect it." Ethan exhaled slowly, his mind torn between pride and desperation. "And if I say no?" Lucas met his gaze. "Then the board will take my company, and you will still be cleaning floors for a man who does not deserve your loyalty." The blunt honesty in his tone disarmed Ethan. There was no manipulation, only urgency. He opened the folder. The first page was a legal agreement drafted by Ward's lawyers: 3 months of a fake marriage, a joint residence requirement, and a clause ensuring absolute confidentiality. Ethan's signature could change both their lives. He looked up. "You really trust me with this?" Lucas's eyes softened. "You saved my life once, Ethan. I trust you more than most people with my name on their paycheck." Silence settled between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Finally, Ethan took the pen and pressed it to paper. His hand trembled slightly as he wrote his name, Ethan Cole. Lucas nodded, signing beside it with a practiced stroke. "Welcome to the Ward family," he said quietly. "Your move-in starts tomorrow." Ethan blinked. "Move-in?" Lucas closed the folder. Clause 3. "We have to live under the same roof to make it believable. Do not worry, the mansion has enough rooms to lose each other for days." For the first time, a hint of humor crossed his face. Ethan allowed a faint smile. "I will try not to spill my mop water on the marble floors." Lucas chuckled, the sound brief but genuine. Outside, thunder rumbled over the city, as if the sky itself sensed the weight of what they had just set in motion. When Ethan left the office, the folder pressed against his chest, he felt both lighter and heavier. He had done it for Noah. But as the elevator doors closed, he caught his reflection in the mirrored wall, a janitor no longer, but not yet a husband. Somewhere between the two, fate was quietly rewriting his story. The janitor who saved the heir's life without knowing it, Part 3. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the Ward estate carrying a single duffel bag. The iron gates opened with a soft hum, revealing a mansion that seemed more like a museum than a home. The driveway stretched endlessly, lined with manicured hedges glistening from last night's rain. A butler met him at the door, leading him through marble corridors filled with oil paintings and quiet echoes. Ethan had cleaned floors his entire life, but never one's worth more than his yearly salary. Lucas waited in the grand foyer, dressed sharply as always, phone in hand, voice calm and commanding as he spoke to someone from the board. When he hung up, his gaze met Ethan's. "I see you made it on time," he said. Ethan nodded awkwardly. "I still cannot believe this is happening." Lucas gave a brief smile. "Neither can I." The butler handed Ethan a document labeled Domestic Conduct Agreement. Lucas gestured toward it. "A few rules for our arrangement. It is mostly for appearances." Ethan scanned it. "No shared bedroom. Attend 5 corporate events together. Keep communication civil and confidential." At the bottom, Lucas had scribbled one last line in his own handwriting: respect each other's space. Ethan looked up. "Seems reasonable." Lucas extended a hand. "Welcome home." Their handshake was brief, firm, and strange in its intimacy. Hours later, Ethan stood in front of a full-length mirror in a guest room the size of his entire apartment. His reflection stared back at him, a man in a tailored suit that fit almost too well, borrowed confidence wrapped in expensive fabric. He thought about Noah's tiny hospital bed and whispered to himself, "This is for you, kiddo." That afternoon, a woman entered the mansion, clipboard in hand, introducing herself as Renee, the public relations manager. "We need to make this believable," she said briskly. "You two will attend your first event together this weekend, a charity gala for the Ward Foundation." She glanced between them, assessing the contrast: the billionaire heir and the janitor turned husband. "We will start with basics. How you met. How long you have been together. Favorite foods. Shared hobbies. We cannot afford any inconsistencies." Lucas crossed his arms. "We will handle it." Renee raised an eyebrow. "See that you do." When she left, Ethan exhaled. "You do realize I have no idea how to fake being a husband, right?" Lucas smirked slightly. "Neither do I. But you will learn fast." Over the next few days, Ethan was thrown into what felt like a crash course in etiquette. A tailor fitted him for multiple suits. A language coach taught him how to navigate conversations with the wealthy. At dinner, he learned which fork to use and which wine to sip. He stumbled, fumbled, and laughed at himself, earning a quiet chuckle from Lucas more than once. One night, as they practiced small talk in the study, Ethan said, "You ever get tired of pretending?" Lucas looked up from his notes, eyes shadowed by something deeper. "Pretending is what people like me are raised to do." Ethan studied him. "And what happens when the pretending stops?" Lucas hesitated, then said softly, "You start to remember who you are." "That can be terrifying." Silence lingered until the butler entered, announcing dinner. The days passed, and the mansion's cold halls began to feel less like a gilded cage. Ethan found himself drawn to the rooftop terrace overlooking the city. He liked the quiet there. One evening, he found Lucas standing by the railing, looking out at the skyline, the wind ruffling his hair. "Long day?" Ethan asked. Lucas nodded. "Always." For a moment, they stood side by side, watching the city pulse below. "You really trust me to pull this off?" Ethan asked. Lucas turned, the faintest smile playing at his lips. "I trusted you with my life, Ethan. I think I can trust you with a lie." Ethan laughed quietly, shaking his head. You have a strange way of showing gratitude. Maybe, Lucas said, but gratitude is overrated. Loyalty, though, that matters. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, their reflections merged in the glass panels of the terrace door, two men bound by a deal neither fully understood. In the distance, thunder rolled again, hinting that the storm between them was only beginning. The Janitor Who Saved the Heir's Life Without Knowing It Part 4. The weekend arrived faster than Ethan expected. The charity gala for the Ward Foundation was held at the Grand Carlton Hotel, a place so elegant it felt like stepping into another world. Crystal chandeliers glimmered like constellations, violins played softly, and every guest looked like they had stepped out of a magazine cover. Ethan stood in the lobby adjusting the cufflinks that Lucas had insisted he wear. His hands still felt awkward in a suit that cost more than his car, but he had practiced his smile in the mirror all morning. Lucas approached, perfectly composed in a black tuxedo, every detail immaculate. You look nervous, he said quietly. You would be too if you spent last week learning which fork not to grab, Ethan replied under his breath. Lucas smirked. Just follow my lead. Cameras flashed as they stepped onto the red carpet. Reporters murmured, trying to identify the man beside the heir. Renee, the publicist, whispered, hold hands. At least look like you are fond of each other. Lucas hesitated only a second before his fingers brushed Ethan's. The contact was brief but grounding, like a silent agreement. Inside, the crowd parted as the Ward heir and his mysterious spouse entered. Ethan's heart pounded as they greeted donors and investors. A few curious stares lingered longer than polite. One older man, a board member named Mr. Collins, raised a glass and said loudly, "So this is the lucky husband we have been hearing about?" His tone dripped with condescension. Quite the surprise, Lucas. Ethan forced a polite smile. Life tends to surprise us when we stop trying to control it, he said. A few nearby guests chuckled, while Collins's grin stiffened. Lucas's expression softened with quiet pride. As the evening progressed, Ethan began to relax, finding his rhythm in the conversation. He spoke genuinely, thanked guests for their donations, and even made a few of them laugh. For someone who had spent his life invisible, being seen was disorienting but strangely empowering. During a short speech, Lucas stood before the crowd, his voice calm but commanding. The Ward Foundation was built to honor compassion, he said. Tonight, that compassion is what binds us, not wealth, not titles, but simple humanity. Ethan felt the words sink into him. For a moment, he forgot it was all a performance. When applause filled the hall, Lucas stepped down and joined him again. You handled yourself well, he said quietly. I almost believed you were enjoying this. Ethan chuckled. Almost. Then, just as the music resumed, disaster struck. A waiter passing by tripped, sending a glass of red wine cascading across Lucas's white cuff. The table nearby fell silent. Mr. Collins sneered, careful, you might stain the family name. Ethan reacted instinctively. He grabbed a napkin, dabbed the spill, and smiled calmly. A stain is only permanent if you ignore it, he said. The trick is knowing when to clean it up. Laughter rippled through the group. Even Collins looked momentarily speechless. Lucas glanced at Ethan, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. You just turned humiliation into applause, he murmured. That was impressive. Years of cleaning floors, Ethan replied softly. You learn timing. The rest of the evening passed without incident, but something had shifted. On the ride back to the mansion, the city lights streaked across the tinted windows, reflecting in Lucas's thoughtful gaze. You were remarkable tonight, he said. You made people see me differently. Ethan shook his head. I just told the truth. Lucas turned toward him, his voice quieter. That is exactly why it worked. When they arrived, the air between them felt lighter, almost warm. As Ethan stepped out of the car, he caught Lucas watching him not with calculation, but something closer to gratitude. For the first time since their deal began, they were not pretending. The night had changed something neither of them could name yet. And as the mansion doors closed behind them, the sound of the rain outside seemed to whisper that every performance eventually becomes reality. The Janitor Who Saved the Heir's Life Without Knowing It Part 5. The following week was a blur of headlines and whispers. Photos from the gala flooded social media, the ward heir and his mysterious husband smiling under the chandeliers. Some praised their charm, others questioned everything. Lucas's PR team worked tirelessly to control the narrative, but behind the polished facade, the mansion felt quieter than usual. Ethan went back to his modest morning routine: coffee, reading updates from Noah's doctors, and checking the contract calendar that Renee had given him. He had 5 more events to attend as Lucas's spouse, yet each day he found the act harder to maintain. It was not because of pressure. It was because, slowly, the act had stopped feeling like one. One evening, Lucas invited Ethan into the private study. The air smelled of coffee and rain-soaked wood. "There is a board meeting tomorrow," Lucas said. "They want to see us together. It will be another test." Ethan leaned against the bookshelf. "Another performance?" "Something like that," Lucas replied. He looked tired but softer than usual. "You did well at the gala. You disarmed Collins. That was not easy." "Years of cleaning up other people's messes," Ethan said with a faint grin. Lucas smiled back, but it faded quickly. "I am not used to someone standing up for me without expecting something in return." Ethan hesitated, then said quietly, "Maybe you should be." The next morning, the boardroom buzzed with tension. 12 executives sat around a long glass table, their eyes sharp as razors. Lucas entered first, every inch the confident heir, and Ethan followed, dressed simply but with quiet composure. Cameras clicked as the meeting began. Collins cleared his throat. "Lucas, your personal life has become quite the spectacle. Care to explain how your arrangement benefits the company's image?" Lucas's jaw tightened, but before he could answer, Ethan spoke. "Maybe it is not about image. Maybe it is about leadership, the kind that is not afraid to be human." The room fell silent. Collins frowned. "And you are?" Ethan met his gaze steadily. "Someone who knows what it is like to start from the ground up. People follow those who can see them as equals, not trophies." For a long moment, no one moved. Then a few of the younger board members nodded, murmuring in agreement. Collins leaned back, visibly annoyed. Lucas shot Ethan a quick glance of gratitude before turning back to the table. "My husband speaks the truth," he said evenly. "I will not run this company with masks or lies." By the time the meeting ended, the tone had shifted. They walked out of the glass tower into the late afternoon sun. Lucas let out a long breath. "You have no idea how much that helped," he said. "You just bought us time." Ethan shrugged. "I just said what was true." Lucas looked at him for a moment, then said softly, "You make truth sound like something valuable. In my world, it is a liability." That night, Ethan wandered through the mansion, unable to sleep. He found himself drawn to the rooftop again. The city glowed below like a sea of restless lights. He leaned on the railing, lost in thought, when he heard footsteps behind him. Lucas joined him silently, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You are awake," Lucas said. "So are you," Ethan replied. They stood side by side, the wind tugging at their sleeves. "Why coffee at midnight?" Ethan asked. Lucas's lips curved faintly. "Because it feels normal. Something we do not get much of around here." They both laughed quietly. After a moment, Lucas's tone changed. "You know, when I first asked you to do this, I thought I was buying time. But now, I think maybe I was buying clarity." Ethan turned, confused. "What do you mean?" Lucas looked out at the skyline. "You remind me what real feels like." The words hung in the cool air, unspoken meanings swirling between them. Ethan wanted to respond but found himself silent. Sometimes, the absence of words said more. When Lucas finally turned to leave, he paused. "Thank you for not pretending with me, Ethan." As his footsteps faded down the hall, Ethan stared at the steam rising from his mug and realized something he never expected. Somewhere between duty and deception, honesty had become the most dangerous thing of all. The Janitor Who Saved the Heir's Life Without Knowing It Part 6. The following days settled into an unexpected rhythm. Lucas spent long hours at the office, preparing for an investor conference, while Ethan took to the quiet corners of the mansion, trying to stay invisible. Yet no matter how big the house was, their paths kept crossing at breakfast when Lucas would forget his coffee, in the library where Ethan dusted old shelves, or in the garden when Lucas took late-night phone calls to avoid being overheard. Each encounter left behind something unspoken, a thread neither of them dared to pull. One evening, Lucas returned home later than usual. The rain had soaked through his coat, and exhaustion weighed on his shoulders. Ethan was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, fixing a broken light fixture that had been flickering for days. He looked up, startled. "You are drenched," he said. "Give me that." Without waiting for permission, he grabbed a towel and handed it to Lucas. Lucas blinked, unused to anyone taking care of him. "Thank you," he murmured. "Rough day?" Ethan asked. "Rough life," Lucas replied with a faint, tired laugh. He leaned against the counter, watching Ethan work. "You fix things easily," he said. "I envy that." Ethan chuckled. "You would not say that if you saw how many I broke first." For a moment, their eyes met. Something about the simplicity of the moment, the smell of rain, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the quiet concern in Ethan's voice felt like a world away from contracts and inheritance. "You should get some rest," Ethan said softly. Lucas hesitated before nodding. "You should too, Mr. Cole." "It is Ethan," he corrected gently. "You can drop the formalities." Lucas smiled faintly. "Only if you drop the sir." The next morning, the air in the house felt lighter. The staff had noticed the shift too. Lucas seemed less cold, more present. But as peace settled in, storm clouds gathered outside their fragile bubble. Late that afternoon, Lucas's uncle, Richard Ward, arrived unannounced. He was a tall man with sharp eyes and the smile of a politician. "So this is the famous husband," Richard said, looking Ethan up and down with thinly veiled disdain. "I see the gossip columns did not exaggerate." Lucas's tone hardened. "What are you doing here?" Richard smirked. "Making sure your domestic situation does not ruin the family name before the investor conference. The board is nervous. They think you have lost your mind." Ethan stayed silent, feeling out of place. Richard circled the room like a vulture. "A janitor, Lucas? Really? Do you expect anyone to take you seriously now?" Lucas stepped forward, voice cold. "I expect them to judge me by results, not by the job title of the man I married." Richard's expression twisted. "Careful, nephew. Sentimentality has destroyed greater men than you." After he left, the silence in the room was thick. Ethan looked down. "He is right, you know. I do not belong in this world." Lucas turned sharply. "Do not say that. You belong wherever you decide to stand." The words struck deeper than Ethan expected. "You cannot keep defending me, Lucas. You will lose everything if they turn against you." "Maybe," Lucas said quietly, "but I will not lose myself." That night, Ethan could not sleep. He stood by the window, watching the rain blur the city lights. He remembered the contract: 90 days, no intimacy, no complications, and realized that somewhere along the line, the rules had already been broken. Down the hall, Lucas sat at his desk, staring at the same storm. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger. He thought about Ethan's steady voice, the warmth in his eyes, and the peace that seemed to follow him wherever he went. For the first time in years, Lucas wondered what it would be like to be loved for nothing, to be seen without expectation. The next morning, neither of them mentioned Richard's visit. But when Lucas left for the office, Ethan found a small note on the kitchen counter written in neat handwriting, "You do belong here. Stop doubting that." He smiled faintly, folded the note, and slipped it into his pocket. He did not know it yet, but that single sentence would soon become his lifeline when everything else began to fall apart. The Janitor Who Saved the Heir's Life Without Knowing It Part 7. The calm did not last long. By the end of the week, scandal erupted like lightning across the city. A gossip blog published a story titled "The Ward Heir's Fake Marriage," complete with photos of the contract and accusations that the entire relationship was staged to protect Lucas's inheritance. The internet exploded. Comment sections filled with cruel jokes, hashtags, and conspiracy theories. Within hours, investors began calling, and the company's stock price wavered. Ethan first saw the news while he was in the mansion's kitchen. His hands went cold as he read the headline again and again. Someone had leaked the contract. Only a handful of people had access. Before he could process what it meant, Renee, the PR manager, stormed into the room, her face pale. "Ethan, where is Lucas?" she demanded. "The board is furious. They think you leaked this." Ethan's stomach dropped. "That is not true. I would never save it," she snapped. "Damage control starts now. Stay out of sight." Minutes later, Lucas returned from the office, jaw clenched, phone pressed to his ear as he barked instructions to his legal team. When he saw Ethan, his expression hardened. "Tell me the truth," he said quietly. "Did you give this to anyone?" Ethan felt the words cut through him. "You think I would do that to you?" "The timing, the access, the motive, they all point to you," Lucas said. His voice was sharp, but underneath was something that sounded like fear. "You needed money. Maybe someone paid you to make this go away." Ethan's throat tightened. "I saved your life. I stood beside you when no one else would. And you think I would sell you out?" Lucas looked away. "I do not know what to think anymore." The silence between them was worse than shouting. Finally, Ethan said softly, "Then there is nothing left to say." He took off the watch Lucas had given him for the gala, set it on the table, and walked out of the mansion. Rain began to fall as he stepped outside, soaking through his shirt, but he did not look back. For hours, Lucas sat in the dark study, replaying every word. Doubt gnawed at him, but pride kept him silent. Then his phone buzzed. It was Renee. "Lucas," she said, voice shaking, "we traced the leak. It came from inside the board, your uncle's assistant. He wanted to discredit you before the conference." Lucas froze. The realization hit like a punch. "Ethan," he whispered. He grabbed his coat and ran into the storm. Meanwhile, Ethan was walking toward the train station, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He had nowhere to go except back to the small apartment he could barely afford. As he waited for the next train, headlights appeared through the rain. A car screeched to a halt in front of him. Lucas stepped out, drenched and breathless. "Ethan," he shouted. Ethan turned, disbelief in his eyes. "You should be at your conference," he said quietly. Lucas shook his head. "I was wrong. It was not you. It was Richard's people. You have to come back." Ethan hesitated. "You accused me, Lucas. You did not even give me a chance." Lucas stepped closer. "I know. And I will spend every day proving I was wrong. Please." The train horn blared in the distance. For a moment, neither moved. Then Ethan sighed, his voice barely above the rain. "You cannot fix everything with apologies." He turned toward the platform as the train approached. Lucas's voice broke through the thunder. "Then let me start with action." But the doors closed before Ethan could answer, leaving Lucas standing alone in the rain, staring at the empty tracks, realizing that for the first time in his life, the thing he wanted most could not be bought. The Janitor Who Saved the Heir's Life Without Knowing It Part 8. 2 days passed after Ethan left, and the Ward Corporation descended into chaos. The leak had shaken investor confidence, and Richard Ward wasted no time exploiting it. He appeared on business networks, calling for Lucas to step down. "The company deserves stability," Richard said with a polished smile. "Family drama should not define leadership." Behind that charm was a trap, and Lucas knew it. The board scheduled an emergency vote to decide his fate. Alone in his office, Lucas stared at the skyline. The city that once looked like opportunity now felt like judgment. On the desk beside him lay a small photograph, one taken at the gala. He and Ethan were laughing, genuine, unposed. For the first time, Lucas realized how much light Ethan had brought into his life, how much darker the world felt without him. The next morning, Lucas arrived at headquarters wearing no tie, no entourage, only resolve. The boardroom buzzed with reporters and shareholders. Cameras pointed like weapons. Richard sat at the far end of the table, smug and certain. "Nephew," he said smoothly, "have you come to resign?" Lucas stood straight. "No. I have come to tell the truth." Murmurs filled the room as he began. "Yes, the marriage began as a contract. I will not deny that. I was desperate to keep this company out of the hands of people who care only for profit. But along the way, something changed. I learned what integrity looks like. I learned it from the man who cleaned these halls long before I ever owned them." The room went silent. "His name is Ethan Cole. He saved my life once, and then he saved my soul. You call this a scandal. I call it a reminder that wealth means nothing without decency." Reporters scribbled furiously. Richard scoffed. "Touching speech, but the board deals in results, not redemption." Lucas reached into his briefcase and placed a document on the table. "Then let us talk results. This is evidence that Richard Ward's assistant leaked confidential contracts to short our stock and profit from the fallout. I had it investigated." Gasps filled the room. The chairman examined the files, his expression hardening. Richard's composure cracked. "You cannot prove I just did," Lucas interrupted. "And I am resigning anyway." Shock rippled through the room. "I built my life around this company," Lucas continued. "But somewhere between power and pride, I lost who I was. It took a janitor to remind me that leadership is not about control, it is about conscience." He turned toward the cameras. "Ward Corporation will donate half of its annual profits to fund community programs under the new Ward Foundation led by Ethan Cole." The crowd erupted in whispers and flashes. Outside, the story spread like wildfire. Some called him reckless, others brave. But for the first time, Lucas felt free. That evening, he drove through the rain to the small neighborhood where Ethan lived. The roads were quiet, the air heavy with unfinished words. He stopped outside the modest building and saw Ethan standing under the awning, staring at the downpour. Lucas stepped out, his coat already soaked. "You really are terrible at staying dry," Ethan said softly. Lucas smiled faintly. "You really are terrible at letting me apologize." Ethan sighed. "You went to war with your family." "Why?" Lucas took a breath. "Because the truth mattered more. Because you mattered more." Ethan looked away, struggling to hide the emotion in his eyes. Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a familiar object, the same small key Ethan had left behind when he walked away. "You forgot this," Lucas said. "It used to open my office. Now it opens something else." Ethan frowned. "What?" "A place with your name on it," Lucas said. "The Noah Community Center. It is already being built. For your daughter, and for every kid like her." For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain fell harder, washing away the noise of the world, until all that remained was the quiet truth between them. Lucas met his eyes and said simply, "Let me come home." The Janitor Who Saved the Heir's Life Without Knowing It, Part 9. The morning after the storm, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. It spilled over the small neighborhood, catching on puddles that shimmered like glass. Ethan stood by the window of his apartment, still trying to believe what had happened the night before. The Noah Community Center. Lucas had named it after his daughter. For someone like Ethan, who had lived most of his life unseen, it felt like the world had finally looked his way and smiled. A knock came at the door. When he opened it, Lucas stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee and a tentative smile. "I did not know if you still liked it black," Lucas said quietly. "I still do," Ethan replied. They sat by the window, the air filled with the smell of rain and silence. "The board accepted your resignation," Ethan said. "Are you sure about this?" Lucas nodded. "For the first time, yes. I lost a title, but I gained something real." He reached into his pocket and placed the small key on the table again. "It is yours now. The center is almost ready. I want you to run it." Ethan stared at the key, emotions catching in his throat. "Lucas, I am just a janitor." "You were," Lucas said gently. "Now you are the reason hundreds of children will have a place to feel safe. You changed my life. Let me help you change theirs." For a long moment, neither spoke. The world outside seemed to slow. Then, from the corner of the room, Ethan's phone buzzed a message from the hospital. Noah's surgery had been successful. She was awake, asking for her father. Ethan's eyes filled with tears as he whispered, "She made it." Lucas smiled softly. "Go to her." Hours later, at the children's hospital, Ethan stood beside Noah's bed. Her small hand found his, and she smiled weakly. "Daddy, are you happy now?" Ethan nodded, his voice breaking. "More than I have ever been." Behind him, Lucas stood quietly, watching the reunion. When Ethan turned, he said, "You did not have to come." Lucas replied, "I wanted to see the reason I fought for something worth losing everything else." Weeks passed, and the Noah Community Center opened its doors with a modest ceremony. Children ran across the courtyard, laughter echoing through the newly painted halls. A framed plaque hung by the entrance, built on kindness. In honor of those who choose compassion over power. Lucas and Ethan stood beneath it, watching the crowd. "It is beautiful," Ethan said. Lucas nodded. "So is honesty. I wish I had learned that sooner." The 2 men walked through the building, their steps unhurried, their silence easy. Outside, the city stretched in every direction, endless and bright. Ethan turned to Lucas. "So what now?" Lucas smiled faintly. "Now we start for real. No contracts. No pretending." Ethan held up the key, its surface gleaming in the sunlight. "You sure you are ready for ordinary life?" "Ordinary sounds perfect," Lucas said. As they stepped out into the afternoon light, children's laughter carried behind them like music. The camera of life pulled back slowly, framing 2 silhouettes walking side by side, one once called a janitor, the other once called an heir. Both finally just men, bound not by wealth or duty, but by something far rarer. Kindness that turned into love, and love that turned into home.